I read the snippet you sent me of Nietzsche. What book was that from?
Twilight of the Idols.
Okay, it's in there. I didn't.
Yeah.
I didn't. I'm curious to get your take and interpretation because I didn't follow a lot of it. There are questions I have, like,
Yeah, it's a bit dense. Nothing that requires special knowledge. It's just complicated analysis. There's no special knowledge really to understand it, other than just knowing about Napoleon generally.
Right.
But I think the main idea is that events build up, so to speak, over time. There's like each thing somebody does leads to another thing. So in a way, Nietzsche was describing it like dynamite ready to go off.
Right.
Like it just things build up until, I mean, there's these geniuses always existed. They have that power, but it's their luck when they're born, whether they can use their abilities to take advantage of that dynamite. So, I mean, although it's incidental that Napoleon, like a person like Napoleon was born when he was, because of the type of person he is, it'd be like inevitable that such a person would blow up that dynamite, that they would begin something big by nature of their being, by the nature of who they are. They would do that inevitably. It's not that the history caused it inevitably, but the individual causing it was inevitable.
Okay, so that's the historical condition which he mentions. He mentions two conditions, historical and physiological. Physiological being the specific individual.
Yeah, whatever is like evolution, bring that out, or progress over the ages, like people develop for whatever particular way. So this type of person comes about. Whatever description you might say, that they were born and then they live in a culture and all that. And the nature of their, like with their beliefs, their will, their desires, the sense of power leads them to do these things. That was about the end of the passage. Why people like to praise him as like selfless and all that. But he's saying, no, it's just that they are powerful people, strong will and willpower and desires, and they enact those things.
He does say later the age in which great men appear is chance.
Yes.
So in a sense, it's not inevitable that there's a Napoleon, if I understood correctly, which is the conditions are there, but if there's no Napoleon, I don't know, what does he expect would happen?
Yes. I think it would just still build up. It's the appearance of a Napoleon or Frederick the Great or whatever great person that makes it blow up, so to speak. The dynamite just keeps building up. It's not that the event is inevitable, but when the person comes about, then the events are inevitable. Like that, their will to make things as they are, they make it happen. It's individuals that make it happen, for better or for worse. Or Napoleon has no moral judgment on them. He's just saying that these heroic figures, big figures, bad or good, doesn't matter. It's they're a type of person that sees themselves as a powerful individual that can accomplish things, and they do these things.
So in Nietzsche's view, there's some kind of historical buildup. What constitutes that buildup? I'm not sure, apart from maybe philosophical context. But let's say there's this buildup, but nothing will happen until you, by chance, get the right man appearing. Is that the idea?
That seems to be what he's saying. But you got to take into account the context of lots of other things Nietzsche has said. But as far as this passage, I think that's the gist of it. If it's confusing, it's because, well, there's a lot more to know about Nietzsche, but that's the gist of it. That's the main idea, I think.
What did you, there are a couple of things in there I wanted to pick just because they were interesting. What did he mean by the genius is a great squanderer? I'll show you. Let's see if I can find it.
Yeah, that was an interesting line. Let me open it again.
Yeah, it's right here where I'm with my mouse. The genius in work and in deed is necessarily a squanderer. The fact that he spends himself constitutes his greatness.
I almost feel like it was being ironic. Like people view him as wasting his time, but he's actually accomplishing something. Like he's spending himself. In a way, you could see it as squandering. But I don't know exactly what I mean by squander. I would almost want to look up it in German if there's a different word, because squander is like one of those words I think that have many meanings.
Right.
But the point is that he spends himself. He spends his greatness. He spends his whatever nobility in his soul, or whatever you want to say. He's saying he's spending that power in them.
And the instinct of self-preservation, as it were, suspended in him, the overpowering pressure of outflowing energy in him forbids any such protection and prudence.
Yeah.
Does that mean I guess he's saying he's so motivated by an idea that just playing it safe, if you want me to put it in like simple terms, is not something this kind of person thinks about.
Yeah, they don't play it safe. Safe
Right.
is not their concern. It's the power to enact their will. It's their will to power. As in power, as in like their will to make things a certain way, their will to make the world as in their image, so to speak.
Right. Okay. And
Which you could
say,
see as sort of why Rand would see some of these things as inspirational, because he is emphasizing individuality. Individuals are shaping history.
right.
That individuals, but I mean, obviously Nietzsche doesn't really have a moral view, but as far as genius and individuality, you can see where that comes from.
I was thinking of an analogy just now on a much smaller scale, which is take someone who's a professional gamer and is making like $10 million for each competition he plays.
Yeah.
It's the case of the context, the age, the history of where he's at allows him now to get to that point. Whereas maybe if he existed, 50 years ago, he would be a cleaner or something. I don't know. I'm just sort of making it up, right? That's sort of the idea.
Yeah. Or at least the potential, like if there's ever such a person, like imagine you just take this general idea of a person. I mean, in a way, Nietzsche is kind of almost giving a relatively, I don't know, like biological basis, or not quite biological, but not based on reason. It's more like a power within you that he's thinking about. Not a rational power, but a power to like sort of like an instinct as a power. And that's why he's kind of focusing on the development over time. And a physiological sense, he means like instinct.
Instinct to him is what? Emotions or something?
It's kind of subjectivistic.
Right.
Yes, but it's an inclination towards something natural about yourself.
Right. Okay.
It's not instinct like in the animal sense, but like an instinct, an inborn desire, inborn will that you're born with.
What did you make of this description of they're older, they're stronger, and they have the power that has been stored for them? So it's like between the relation of a genius, which is this section here, these two, the relation of a genius is to his age is that which exists between strength and weakness, between maturity and youth. The age is relatively always very much younger. Something, I can't read that. Less mature, less resolute, and more childish. What did you make of that? Like, why is he drawing an analogy to age? Like, why is Napoleon older than people around him?
I mean, in a way, there's youth is more not as held back by previous knowledge, I think, or it's held back by like when you get older, many people kind of mellow out, so to speak. I think that's kind of what you're referring to. Like,
I read it the other way.
Are more, or did I misread it?
Yeah, that's why I would have gone
with
with your interpretation, but he says they are stronger, they are older. So Napoleon is older.
Oh, I see. I misread what I misheard you actually. I think he's just trying to say that, well, maybe that's these people maintain some aspect of their power, but by time, it's tempered by experience in the kid. It's like a skill, I guess he's saying. That's how I
Okay.
interpret it, that they've mastered their time. They've mastered their time period. They've learned what needs to be learned about their time period in order to control it as they wish, or to live their life according to a certain way or whatever standard they use. It allows them the ability to do that. Napoleon learned how to conquer most of Europe through understanding how people worked in his time period. Like, how did the French work? How did the Italians, the Spanish, the Germans? You had to understand these things and the culture, how to maintain power. You had to understand the economics even to maintain the power of France. All these sort of things you had to master.
For what it's worth, just coincidentally, I was just listening to one of the lectures on medieval Christianity, and in that lecture, he said that when Aristotle was reintroduced, he struck like a bombshell.
I don't
And
understand why he would say that. Doesn't seem to be.
I thought it was connected to that description of the passage in Nietzsche, and then he says, yeah, when a force of this dimension was let loose in medieval Christendom, something had to be done. So that's the historical context. So it's in a sense, it's a person because it's his text, but it's also historical context. So the reason he said that was that they rediscovered his texts, and it posed a lot of problems to Christianity. And there were a lot of the better minds of the time were trying to make sense of it and reconcile it with Christianity. And
I see.
It created all this chaos around that. The church was like banning more and more of his texts until they banned everything. But then there were minds working and trying to reconcile it with Christianity. It really caused a problem for them. I was just thinking of the reason I brought that in because of that language, bombshell, just makes me think of the Nietzsche passage.
Oh yeah. I don't think that they ever reconciled Aristotle and Christianity. It just basically Aquinas made Aristotle a Christian. That's basically all that happened. I mean, it's good that they introduced Aristotle, but for the most part, he made Aristotle a Christian. He didn't care about what Aristotle said as much as, can Aristotle be made Christian?
Yeah, correct. That's what he said. That at the outset, he said the task was impossible. It's not. It's a contradiction that you can't reconcile. But the point is, it sparked his reintroduction into Europe, and then from then on, there was a shift began.
Well, what do you mean sparked? I mean, I thought Aquinas was sparked by other things. Or do you mean Aquinas sparked interest? Is that what you said?
Yeah, so you wouldn't have an Aquinas without the introduction of Aristotle's text and Aquinas's attempt to try and reconcile it with Christian philosophy, which then led to its introduction. Eventually, it was accepted in church doctrine. It took a few hundred years, but
I would say it's one of the Islamic Aristotelians that were more important than Aquinas. I was going to talk to you about that actually, to bring that up.
He mentioned Averroes and Maimonides, and it was he called them the Mohammedans are responsible for reintroducing Aristotle's texts. But it was, from what I got, it was Aquinas who then put it into, basically got it into the church dogma. Obviously, it wasn't reconciled, but it was in there, it was accepted. And on that basis, then there were a lot of people studying the text later because of that introduction into church text. Before there was none of that. So that's what he said. I don't know how much that actually fits into Aristotle, because you have into Nietzsche's description though. It does shift the age, but I don't know how much it relates. Yeah, anyway.
I want to bring some things up about Aristotle as far as like his scholarship after he died. I think the Islamic world liked him a lot, or at least he was early on. For some reason, many people in the Islamic world liked him, or not, I shouldn't say liked him, but many studied him the way Aquinas did. So there was they're the ones who kept Aristotle alive, at least somewhat. And I'm bringing that up because, I mean, it was the Islamic golden age of that time. It seems that interest in Aristotle can often correlates with the rationality of the culture, because they've accomplished a lot of things with regard to math, astronomy, ophthalmology, optics, understanding some natural philosophy. It seemed really beneficial. Like all the study of Aristotle was, and some of it was mystical, of course, in the same way Christians were, but there was still great interest in Aristotle. The works were available. Avicenna studied him a lot. He said that he was like a child genius in a way, but like he graduated like medical school or medical training early. But
Are you talking about Maimonides or Averroes?
Avicenna.
Oh, Avicenna. Okay.
And he said he didn't understand metaphysics. By Aristotle, it's like, it was the hardest thing ever to understand. Until one day he read a book by some guy who explained it's like, it changed everything. Just understanding Aristotle. There's all kinds of people like that in the Islamic world but of course it deteriorated. I think mostly because that's the way the religion expanded, same way as Christianity.
Right.
And it kind of just died away. And then Aristotle just,
or was stamped out.
Yeah, like Averroes, he had a lot to say about Aristotle. He's probably more as Aristotelian as Aristotle, a little more mystical, but still a lot more grounded, and thought that religion had to be in line with the natural world, that there shouldn't be a contradiction. If one is true, the other is true. Like they can't contradict each other. If what God says is true, then it cannot contradict the world we see. And even saying that, like, we don't need to take the Quran literally. We should understand to interpret it, to understand it, what it means. Don't just take it literally. He was very grounded about things.
Yeah.
And he was probably in trouble for that. Like I heard a story where he talked to a sultan, I think. He didn't want to answer what the guy said because it would reveal too much. Like he might reveal too much of who he is, like what his views are,
right,
to maybe the extent that he's maybe a heretic, or at least not acceptable beliefs.
Yeah.
And then he only answered when he heard what the answer, asked the question of the sultan, so then he could figure out what the sultan thought.
Right.
But it kind of reflected how it was. Even then, it's kind of dangerous to be so grounded in the natural world, even if it is philosophical.
Yeah.
And
it sounds like Christianity. There's a similarity there to Christianity in the Dark Ages as well, Middle Ages. I forgot the distinctions, but it was similar. There was church doctrine, and any philosophical position, including a Platonic position on concepts, was ruled out just on the basis of theology. Like, nope, this is against the doctrine, and so you have to repudiate what you say, or it's heresy, and you'll be, I don't know what they do to you, they burn you or something. So there's probably, I'm going to guess that for whatever reason, I don't know why, but in the Islamic world, the religion managed to stamp out Aristotle, whereas they, in the Christian world, that didn't happen. So like initially it did, but for whatever reason, I guess the leading intellectuals at the time or whatever, someone managed to, it was probably Aquinas, but there was a person who managed to get it into the church doctrine. He did say in the lecture, which was interesting, in the Q&A period, he said it's speculative, but someone asked, like, what would have happened if Aristotle was reintroduced, but he was completely 100% consistent. And so it was obvious that it was either God or religion. He said, he didn't know, he said speculation, but it's very likely, it's possible that, well, obviously the church would have been more aggressive in trying to stamp it out. And it's a question of, would the text have even survived then? Because it's only because of the contradictions in Aristotle that there was this idea that you thought you could reconcile it with religion.
Yeah. Oh, and one of the Averroes is, he got so knowledgeable and wrote so much about Aristotle is because he was a tutor to the Sultan. He told him what he understood of Aristotle. And that's why he wrote so much, just to teach him.
Right.
Because the king was having trouble understanding, which I guess that's like the oldest thing ever. Aristotle's trying to understand, help me. It's like that's the oldest question and oldest problem in the book.
Oh, I see.
Literally.
Interesting. So even back then, it's Aristotle's hard to understand. Help me.
Even the really geniuses had
Yeah.
trouble. That's why Avicenna was like really a genius, but
Yeah.
like the way he could understand things quick.
Yeah.
But metaphysics was hard,
Wow.
which now I'm like afraid to read it, but I'll try. But yeah, that was my spiel about Averroes and all that.
Very
There's
cool.
a story by Borges about Aristotle and Borges, Aristotle and Averroes. It's called Averroes' Search, and
Is
it's
that
about.
Yep, go on.
It's by Borges. It's about Borges is imagining Averroes trying to understand poetics by Aristotle. Apparently, in the Islamic world, they didn't have plays, so you don't have tragedies and all that. So how do you understand poetics if you don't know what a play is? And he's trying to understand the book Poetics. That's what the story is about.
And all right, is it in Fictiones?
What do you say?
Is it in his book Fictions?
No, the
How do I
Aleph,
say-
I think.
I see.
Aleph. Yeah. So, I mean, the point of that is really that sometimes interpreting Aristotle is just understanding the time period even. I mean, it's one thing to understand his words, but to understand what he's reasoning with can be difficult. Even if you have poetry, like, or rather plays, you can understand poetics, but there's this way of thinking. I mean, you do need to remember it's 2,500 years ago. I mean, it's one thing to say there's a difference in culture between, say, China and the US, but then you add thousands of years, and even the words mean different things. It's almost like an alien. It's really an alien world because they thought of things so differently.
Right. Yeah, I
Even
guess
the average person.
the question then is always, is it worth it? That's the
Yeah. Yep. Okay.
let's see. I might want to ask, see if we can apply more of Nietzsche to some of my questions about Napoleon.
Yeah. He wrote a bunch.
Okay, so take, for example, Napoleon invading Germany, and then Germany feeling angry, like German people, like you mentioned, Wagner, feeling angry and embarrassed, and then also wanting to adopt a kind of similar, more aggressive policy of creating a strong Germany and attacking enemies. Would that have, like, how would Nietzsche think about that in terms of, if Napoleon wasn't there, would Germany still become this kind of ultra nationalist nation?
I think Nietzsche would say yes, because Nietzsche mostly blames other things, I think, for the cause of Germany becoming as nationalist as it is. He did write a lot about nationalism, but
Right.
I think he thought it more of a cultural phenomenon that happened.
I see.
But maybe we can make the connection with Napoleon. But
Right.
I think, yeah, like German culture, Wagner in particular had a strong importance to that. I also think he mentioned things about, it's hard to say sometimes. I don't know enough detail, but I do know he said plenty about Wagner and sometimes about socialists, but not really. And he didn't like socialists at all.
I just think,
Go
on.
Trying to think, sir. What else did he say? I think he thinks there's a lot more to do with the way the German people are, the way the values and the culture are, more so than it is a particular event by Napoleon or something like that.
Yeah, because France became, you could say, ultra nationalist with Napoleon, but then I don't see why, if you omitted Napoleon, why you couldn't just have Germany also go through some similar process without
Yeah, I
even
think
being.
you're right.
So, but I don't know. It's hard to, like I said, it's hard. We both agreed it's hard to reason historically. So
Yeah. Yeah, you need a lot of the historical details, but Nietzsche did believe it was mostly a cultural phenomena that these things come about. He like describe it as decadence. He mentioned some other. The passage I gave you, actually, the one just before it says
yeah, I remember
some
the
things of
progression towards
conservatism.
decadence.
Yeah,
I read that book.
conservatism.
What is that? What does that mean?
Well, decadence is like, how do you like? Well, usually it's like overstated, overstated praise or good thing. Like a decadent party is like over the top, but it's almost like over the top at claims about like how good they're being and whatnot. Like he does describe it as decadence, like I guess a loss of value, a loss of like cultural value.
Okay. I still don't get it, but that's okay. It's probably, I don't want to get into that one too. It's a separate alleyway.
Yep.
Take, for example, another question, like if America didn't intervene in World War II, what would happen to Europe? Is there a way, do you think there is a way to answer this question? I know there's a movie on it, I think called The Man in the Castle, something like that.
Man in the High Castle.
Yeah, I think you mentioned it ages ago.
It's interesting.
Because it seems like if you can't omit variables and observe like you can in an experiment. So then the question is what the reasoning becomes. Like what would be a valid process of reasoning? Maybe it's an unanswerable question. I don't know.
I don't think you could answer it.
Yeah.
I think it's a matter of what you're trying to explore. I think it's a matter of exploration of ideas, but it can't be a rational proof of anything. It's not a proof of anything. It's just a what if scenario, which is counterfactual reasoning. Is in a way, I could just tell you what you can only think about different scenarios. It could help you reason about similar scenarios in the future, but if different choices were made. So it's another way, it's like you can project different events based on with historical knowledge. You can at least find facts that were not known at the time. So you can project out from there. But mostly it's a matter of you'll never know the right answer, of course. So it's really just a matter of what question are you analyzing in particular? I mean, do you want to find out what about the state of Europe are you curious about in particular? Are you curious about, say, the power of Germany? Are you curious about, say, the power of the USSR or something else? Or things like that. Right. Or what would happen if you imagine that, well, Germany is now totalitarian over much of the world, a substantial part of the world. So it's really a matter of the question you want to understand more so than what would happen. I mean, that's too broad. You should be more specific. The same way as a writer would. I mean, a writer would just try to be examining like broad themes usually, but a historian or just say somebody's just analyzing a what if scenario, like a simple scenario, then it's just a matter of why you're asking the question. Then you could answer it appropriately.
Right. Okay. I was asking it just for the purpose of trying to think better about identifying causes, but never mind.
Yes.
As a side, somewhat related to, this is related because it's like processes of reasoning that are applicable to different fields. Like, for example, in maths, there's a lot of emphasis on deduction or deductive thinking.
Yep.
Do you know much about that? Because I was reading about that, and it seems like what happens in math, well, it's deductive because I wasn't quite sure if it's deductive mainly because the Greeks said that was the only valid way to do maths, or because there's no theory of induction that's good enough to validate whether you identify a pattern and that's valid. Because a lot of what I've understood is a lot of discoveries in maths, they follow this kind of process of someone observes a pattern, similar to how like the Babylonians or Egyptians, they didn't care about proofs, they just observed patterns. okay, well, 3 is good enough. That's like close enough to pi. They didn't even know what pi was. They didn't care. They just kind of gives them the area of the circle. That's fine. It seems to work. We know it seems to hold in all circles. That's, or you might observe, for example, there are other examples, but now the process of maths is you observe a pattern like that, and then you have to try and find a deductive proof for it in order for it to be proper mathematics. So what do you think of, like, is deduction only a valid method of reasoning in maths, because the only valid method of reasoning in maths because of the Greek tradition, or like, do you think maybe there's like something missing there with induction?
I think it's the Greek tradition more so.
Yeah.
I mean, even with geometry, it's always when they understood that it was just deductive and involves making a claim that, I mean, of course, there's some disagreement, but where those claims can derive from, what can constitute the beginnings of your deduction. But as a science, as a way of study, it always seems like math. The method has been deduction. That's the method of math. I mean, that's just the way it works, I think, the way the field works. Of course, you can make different conclusions based on that view, but it's mostly a deductive way of thinking. The same way that Aristotle's system of logic is really aimed at mathematical sort of thinking, where it is deductive and it is a certain way to guarantee certain conclusions based on certain premises, right, and make sure that they hold necessarily, right, and hold everything holds together. And I do think that's even just part of a Greek tradition generally anyway, not necessarily unique to Aristotle. Yep. I mean, that he based his theory on a lot of what geometry did and other, like he just formalized it into something we could put into a more general way, like math.
Yeah.
But it is supposed to be deductive. And so yeah, I think, I mean, it is, I've heard about ways that it can be grounded in a more naturalistic way, not just that, well, there's circles, but no perfect circle exists, therefore we're not reasoning about real things. I mean, some people do think that, but there is a way to think of circles in a way that they don't only exist in the perfect Platonic sense.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I was curious because I was trying to relate it as well to like each field. I don't know, but like the role of different kinds of reasoning in different fields. So like, I don't know, in history, you can't really do experiments. So experimental kind of reasoning and induction based of that doesn't work. So what is the appropriate method of reasoning? I don't know. In maths, apparently it's just deduction, like we just chatted about, but whether there can be more, I don't know. But yeah, I was just curious about that because in relation to history, it seems like history is pretty barren. Like, I don't know if there's much theory on other than
there
just
probably is more than
facts.
Theory. I'm not sure. There must be out there. I mean, you can be inductive about history. It's just gathering your facts is just a different way than many other fields.
Right.
But to bring up counterfactual reasoning again, it could just be a way to generalize historical principles, because if you take one thing out, you can see and add another thing, you can try to analyze what would happen if you introduce other principles, like what if somebody restrict individual rights, or what if this atrocity didn't happen, what would have been left in there? Say if we imagine, what if Aristotle was never brought back, what would the world look like? Well, you would have to think about, well, what does the world look like when there is Aristotle? Islamic culture in age was great. Aristotle was there. No more Aristotle, it was terrible. Pre-Aristotle, medieval Europe was a mess. It started to get better when Aristotle was there. So you can start to wonder, like, if it's gone, it would be more like the early Middle Ages. What would that be like? You can, things like that you can extrapolate, you can figure out to some general things. Right. No exactness to it, because a lot of that would require a lot of historical knowledge. So I think in your case, it's more about finding the right people to study from, because even for me, it's hard to study history. Like there's so much detail. I always need help. Like I need somebody else's presentation before I start to understand it.
Yeah. Same. That's why I shifted to go from Ariel Durant's to Scott Powell's work, which is much more integrated. Anyway, what do you think of this? The importance of culture for the sustainability of democracy. The reason I brought this up is because, well, democracy has also been forced on cultures, right? Like on Japan, you force it on Japan, you force it on India, they're still democratic, but then you can't force it on a Muslim country. But then, so on the one hand, you have two cultures where you're like, well, why would democracy work there? Like, why wouldn't the democracy turn itself into dictatorships, which in a mystical culture would seem to be the natural progression, but yet it didn't.
Well, which was the mystical culture in this case?
Japan and India.
Why would that be?
In this passage, it says it's due to the forceful imposition of their respective models by Western powers. But I'm pretty sure that Western powers have tried to force democracy of like on Afghanistan, for example, right?
For sure. Doesn't take hold there actually very
and here
well.
It even says there was nothing in the political culture of the princely states of India that even hinted at democracy until the British Empire fostered its development, as if somehow you could separately force upon someone politically different principles. Nor was there, and it continues, nor was there more than embryonic interest in democracy in Japan at the time of World War II. It was forced upon that country by its conqueror, the United States, which
is
like,
this from, by the way? Where is this
Scott
from,
Powell,
by the way?
Scott Powell.
Okay.
His book.
Yeah. How is democracy defined?
I'm going to guess it's a form of government where people elect the officials and have some power and say in the running of the country. That's my general low resolution definition for you.
To me, that doesn't seem to be what he's referring to. Like, I'm not sure. And if he means respecting rights, the British Empire were terrible at that. So I don't exactly know what he means.
Yeah.
I mean, the only way I can interpret this is
But what about the British Empire were terrible at that? But let's say in contemporary culture at the time, were they not better than the rest of the cultures?
I'm not sure. I don't think so. Not in my opinion. But I'm trying to think about this. There's nothing in political culture.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the general question is just that, the importance of culture in sustaining a democracy. And it's purely based on that observation that you can get, Japan's a democracy, and so is India, and yet you can have a Muslim country and you put a democracy on them and it'll quickly turn into theocracy.
I mean, I would say that their culture was more compatible with it anyway, regardless of who imposed it. For it to take hold and stay, I still think it's more compatible. And I think the nature of Buddhism and Hinduism is more compatible with democracy than Muslim and Islam. I think that is more compatible with rights, so to speak. So, I mean, that potential is there. And to me, I would say that aspect of culture is better. I mean, sure, you might say that it's far from democracy, but as far as the view on people in general, I would say Buddhism and Hinduism are less problematic. That's my best answer.
Okay. I want to talk to you about, did you remember that book you recommended a while ago of Thinking in Systems by Donella Meadows?
Yes.
She gave an example in the introduction to the book about, she stands in front of a class and she holds a spring, a little, what do you call those little springs? Like one of those things that you can
slinky.
Slinky, yeah. And she asked the class what caused the spring to fall, and everyone's like, "Oh, you removed your hand." And then she's like, "No, it was because it's the structure of the spring And so anyway, it gets at the four causes, Aristotle's four causes.
Yeah.
But I was thinking like, all right, when you apply Aristotle's four causes to an example like that, how do you, like if you just think of the efficient cause, that is the agent causing the entity to act, then like this spring, I guess the structure of the spring is more like the
Material cause.
Material cause. Okay, yeah, the material cause. But let's look just at the efficient cause for now. How do you know which thing to look at? Because I could say, oh, well, it's the hand being pulled away. Oh, no, it's the contraction of your muscles. Oh, it's the desire to make a demonstration. Oh, it's your the lunch you ate, which gave her calories. Like basically, I feel like I can go all over the shop with all these different causes. And so how do you know which dimension or aspect of a thing to analyze?
Well, I mean, I do think that's a relevant question. That separate, I think that question is what degree of abstraction, as in what science do you want to use to study it? I mean, sometimes you got to pick, is it, do you want neuroscience, physiology, psychology,
Okay.
physics?
Okay.
I mean, that's kind of just the nature of the question. So you just got to figure out which one to use. And then you could apply the four causes. And by the way, the four causes are mostly about entities, so it doesn't apply well to something like history because for that reason. It's like, why is a slinky the way it is? That's what the four causes are supposed to be for. Or why is an apple the way it is?
I got it. Okay, cool. I do like his theory of explanation though, because it prevents you from going down a rabbit hole of infinite whys. Why does the water flow? Because it's water. And then if you want to go to deeper levels, you can, but that is an explanation. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Like it gives you a base to begin your reasoning as opposed to just get stuck on infinite whys.
Yeah. It'll be then to ask like, well, what is it to be water?
Right.
Like, what does it mean to be water?
Right.
And by the way, like intention to make a presentation, that's the final cause. Like why this occurred. Like you made it happen, like for a reason. So
right,
you brought it about for a specific purpose.
I see. So the final cause is her intention to demonstrate.
Yeah.
Material is the slinky. Efficient is the hand. And what's the other? The formal cause, which would
be more like how does slinkies behave in general as a genus, which probably would be like, I don't know, slinking downstairs, or it's like the pattern or what they do. What does slinkies do in general? They go downstairs.
Oh, actually, isn't it then the what is the last one as well? The last cause that we said was intention. What's it called? The final cause. Isn't the final cause just the final position of the slinky? The slinky is on the floor.
No. I mean, yes and no. For now, I'll say yes, that's a fine answer. There's a better way to say that, but that is correct. I mean, the final cause to get to that point by the nature of the way slinkies are. I mean, but you can say you can look at final cause as either the person using it brings about a certain way, or you could focus on just the thing.
I see.
It's never necessarily just one of all these things. And a material cause would be like, okay, it's plastic. Is it made of anything else? Is there anything else in it? And you could say there's multiple final causes mixed in it. I mean, there's different ways to analyze it. You want to focus on just the slinky. You could say, oh, its final cause is to reach the bottom of the stairs. But if you want to look at using slinkies, like a person using it, like you say, oh, she needs to make a demonstration. The efficient cause is well, that would be explaining her activity. Why does she use a slinky as an example? How do you explain that? That gets a weird example. So I'd focus on just the slinky, not about her so much.
When I say then the formal cause is slinky in a hand, the efficient is hand being removed. Final is, if I focus on the slinky, and final is slinky on the floor.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Formal is more like, just think of the class of slinky, not this particular slinky. Like slinkies go downstairs and it's described in a specific equation. You say that's the formal cause.
Okay. You could probably work, like, I guess you could find more simple examples like this, right? That's where I'd need to work, and then work through them, and then it would make more sense. Okay, cool.
Like Aristotle uses like an example as an octave. An octave is described as, I don't know, is there an equation like 1/8 lambda or whatever? I just made that up. That's the formal cause of an octave. It's the pattern of octaves. All octaves that fit in the genus.
Okay.
All things that fit in the genus octave fit this activity.
Okay. So I guess then, yeah, okay, cool. I sort of see. We did discuss this last time, but any thoughts on you know how Stoicism is popular today? Do you think that is, there is some relationship there between the context that Stoicism was formed in and today? Because it was interesting. I just found it so interesting that he listed the practical political reasons for the interest in Stoicism at the time, and that the ones that, they're all dot pointed here, you can see. And I was like, oh, so is that I don't know if you've got more thoughts on that, but is that the connection between, you could say there's some parallels to today, this sense of losing, the world being more chaotic, uncertain, unstable, people not feeling that confident about careers or whatever else. And so there's the link to Stoicism.
I almost suspect it's more of a oversimplification of intellect these days. Like reducing it to something simple as like reading, if you read Meditations and you like it, you're a Stoic. Like, no, there's much more to it than that. It's not just saying that, oh, you can withstand any disappointment and not hate yourself. Like, it's deeper than that. It's more an attitude about life entirely. Not even just like, oh, you adopt a belief just to look like you're philosophical. I think that's more what it is. I don't blame. Well, go ahead.
Continue. I'll tell you after.
I think it's more of an expression of lack of intellect in our time period. I think there's a lack of respect of intellectual activity, kind of leads to people just simplifying things. I think that's more, which I don't know if you could say that's deeper than that is uncertainty. Maybe that's why people oversimplify, because it's the only way to make things certain is to simplify everything. So you might still be right on that.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, because what you're saying could be true, but then why not an interest in Augustine's City of God? Or why not an interest in the plethora of other philosophies? Why Stoicism?
True.
Which you constantly, it's like a thing. I heard someone say, oh, all the tech guys are like Stoicism bros. Why Stoicism specifically? Anyway, I guess it's speculation, but I just found it
Buddhism
interesting, that
too.
connection.
Buddhism
Buddhism is popular too. I agree with you. It's interesting. I always pick up books because I have friends into Buddhism and meditation. I've tried to meditate, and I always pick up books on Buddhism, and I get nothing out of them. And I meditate, I get nothing out of it. I've just got one now, The Science of Enlightenment. You're right. There's so many books now, and everyone reads these books and they say it changes their lives or it does this and that, but I can never get a solid answer. It's all also vague. It's like, oh, it's made me more self-aware. I'm like, well, I've meditated for a while and I don't notice any difference. And so I don't know what to make of it. It's a very strange, that's my experience with it, but you're right that it's popular. Oh. Okay. Okay, so this is a passage on pride, Aristotle's pride. I didn't quite follow. It seems like it's a separate virtue for him, but then the way it's described seems like it's a byproduct rather than a specific active virtue.
Yeah.
you have any thoughts on his pride?
Trying to read the passage really quick. I'm halfway through.
I see. Sure.
I think I've read this before. A different translation, but I know this. Yeah, I was literally reading this passage today for different reasons. But yeah, I was reading this literally today.
Very cool.
In what way does he think of it as a byproduct state than a virtue? I think primarily it is just right understanding of your own merits and what you deserve. But I think he's trying to say that by actually succeeding with that requires every other virtue at the same time as well. It's like we spoke about with Rand's virtues. I mean, they should be simultaneous. And I do think Aristotle thinks of it that way. It's just that he puts it as a crown because by understanding pride, you necessarily live by the other ones. Because you can't get what you can't give yourself what you deserve if you don't really deserve anything. It is about what you deserve as an individual, what you deserve to yourself, and about what you deserve to say about yourself and claim about who you are.
Yeah, although I don't see how you can ever not deserve anything. But
well, I mean, I shouldn't split that way, but that pride is in relation to how you live by the other virtues. I mean, to say what you deserve is to say that you deserve certain things, to say that you live by certain virtues that you
see
deserve.
What I mean then?
Yeah.
If pride is how you live by other virtues, it does seem like, or at least the wording there keeps making me think of it as some passive byproduct. We can get deeper into this later too. I'm reading the Nicomachean Ethics.
Yeah. That part is more difficult. I mean, the part whether is it a byproduct or itself a virtue. I mean, I just think of it, and my short answer is just that. Just expressing greatness in yourself properly. But you're right. I think we should come back to it once you read a bit more of it, I think, because I think there's more context would help. What about the rest of the passage?
There's other, well, you mean on pride or egoism?
On pride here, this one here.
He goes into examples of the proud man. You know, he does not run into trifling dangers, nor is he fond of danger, because he honors few things. Man, his sentences, I know these are translations, so it's not his fault, but it's so sprawling and difficult to hold it all.
Yeah. Sometimes it helps to use a pen and just mark off the clauses. Right. It helps.
Yeah, I mean, he just gives lots of concrete examples of who the prideful man is and that kind of thing. So
yeah.
A question here, a minor question. Aristotle says that the true egoist is the man of reason, not the whim-worshipping brute of the sophists. The sophist for Aristotle, as for Socrates, is merely engaged in expressing the worst element of himself, the part that isn't really him. So I'm guessing it's got the appetites or something like that. But why does he think it's not really him?
Because they're usually just putting on a show, not what they actually believe. They don't say what they believe. They're just about winning an argument. They don't really care about the truth. They only care about appearing to win an argument. That's all they care about. They don't care if they legitimately win. They only care for appearances. So really everything that they are, what their job is even, is not to be really who they are. It's just deception and lying and no intention of even the truth. It's merely appearance.
And then what about, so that's for the sophist, but what about someone who's just trying to enjoy life, take an Epicurean or who are the Cyrenaics, those who like said you should just eat, drink, and be merry? How are they? Would he also say they're not really being themselves?
I'm not sure. I do think he would, not in the sense that they're fulfilling any life according to the nature of man, but he probably would say that they are acting according to what they think they are, what they honestly think is the case, which is different to Aristotle. I mean, to Aristotle, like a sophist is like the worst of the worst. And most Greeks felt that way too. Because they like deceived, they were deceptive and didn't say what they mean. And they didn't care about saying what they meant. They just want to appear like they're smart.
Right. There was this
Like
interesting.
Aristotle did distinguish between being a sophist and just reasoning badly. Like you can make
I
a
see.
mistake about reasoning or just be dumb,
Right.
but it's different than just faking it.
Okay. Well, I found this interesting, this part that I highlighted as red in the long passage. For existence is good to the virtuous man, and each man wishes himself what is good. Well, this is, I'll just highlight it here. While no man chooses to possess the whole world if he has first to become someone else. That's interesting. It sort of makes me think of that quote by Jesus. Like, what shall it profit a man if he possess the whole world but lose his soul? But is that what he means, or what does he mean?
Where's this quote from, Aristotle?
Yeah, this is from Aristotle,
Okay.
the Nicomachean Ethics.
Yeah, I mean, it reminds me of that too. Like, it is about integrity in the objective sense of the word.
I see.
It's not worth becoming something other than what you are. It's not worth being something else other than what you are, which will also include. It's not worth being anything other than human. Would be part of that too. You don't want to become non-human, is part of what he's saying. It's better to be what you are than to fake what you are. Well, no one chooses.